Imagine a man living among tombs, far from his family, far from society, chained not only by iron shackles, but by invisible forces that tore him apart day and night. His screams echoed through the hills, and his appearance struck terror into anyone who dared to come near. In the eyes of the town, he was a lost cause. For him, there was no hope, no future, no life. Only the darkness that consumed him. But then, on what seemed like an ordinary morning, a boat approached the shore. Inside it was the one whose very presence shook the invisible realms. The disciples, still bewildered by the recent miracles, had no idea they were about to witness a scene they would never forget. The possessed man ran toward Jesus, not to attack him, as everyone expected, but because something deep in his heart recognized that here was his only chance of freedom at that moment. The hidden truth was revealed. Inside that man, there wasn't just one evil spirit, but an entire legion of demons. Forces that defied human reason, that had destroyed his dignity and stolen his peace. What was about to unfold was not just a struggle over the fate of one man, but a direct confrontation between the power of darkness and the authority of the Son of God. And before everyone's eyes, the impossible happened. The one who seemed beyond recovery was soon found sitting, clothed, and in his right mind. What no iron shackle could accomplish, the word of Jesus achieved in seconds, restoring the mind, the heart, and the life of a man. But what does this story have to do with you today? Stay until the end of this video and discover how this miracle reveals truths that can also transform your life, because no one, absolutely no one, is beyond the reach of Christ's grace. Hello, what a joy to have you here again. Every time we gather to hear and watch these stories, we are not just remembering past events, but discovering living lessons that still speak to our hearts today. Today, we will dive into one of the most striking passages of the Gospels, the deliverance of the demon-possessed man of Gadara. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps us reach even more people who need to hear messages of hope. And I want to know from you, from which city and country are you watching us? Write it down in the comments. It will be a blessing to know how far this message is reaching. The story we are about to revisit shows us an extraordinary miracle, as well as the power of Jesus to transform what seems impossible. So often, we look around and see broken people trapped in addictions, pain, or trauma, and we think, there's no way out. Maybe you have even felt that yourself in some area of your life. But when we look at the experience of that man in Gadara, we see that the grace of Christ can cross any border, break any chain, and restore any heart. The scene is unforgettable. A man rejected, considered dangerous, lost among the tombs. But who became the first missionary sent by Jesus to his own region? And that leads us to reflect, what could the presence of Christ accomplish in us as well, if we sought him with sincerity? This video is not just another biblical story, but a personal invitation to reflection. Because the same voice that once said, "Come out of him," to the power of darkness, still echoes today, bringing life, peace, and hope. So, prepare your heart. In the next few minutes, we will walk together through this story, chapter by chapter, and discover how it can also shine light on the path of your own life. The wind blew strongly over the Sea of Galilee. The waters still seemed to remember the storm that, only hours earlier, had nearly swallowed the disciples. Now, however, after Jesus had commanded the wind and the sea to be still, the lake was calm, reflecting the first lights of morning. It was as if nature itself had bowed in silence before the one who is Lord of all creation. Yet the Master did not rest. His eyes fixed on the horizon revealed that there was a specific purpose for this crossing. He was not heading to Gadara by chance. There was someone there who desperately needed his presence as the disciples rode. Perhaps without fully understanding the reason for the journey, the heart of Jesus burned for a man everyone else had already forgotten. None of the neighbors of that poor soul believed in his recovery. No religious leader cared to intercede for him. His own family possibly already considered him lost forever. But there is no place so dark that the light of Christ cannot reach. The journey to Gadara was living proof that heaven moves on behalf of even the most despised of men. Imagine the contrast of that scene. On one side, the city went on with its business, tending livestock, trading in the marketplace, living as if that possessed man was merely an inconvenient detail in the landscape. On the other side, the Son of God was crossing the sea just to rescue a single life. This reveals the scale of values in the kingdom of God. For him, one soul is worth more than herds, more than fortunes, more than crowds. The Master was not going to Gadara to give a great speech or to be applauded by many. He was going in search of one tormented heart. And this teaches us that even when the world ignores us, we are never outside the memory or the care of God. The disciples, still impressed by Jesus' power over the storm, may have thought the worst was already behind them. But they were about to discover that the greatest storm is not the one that shakes the waters, but the one that devastates the soul. And it was precisely that storm Jesus was going to face in the land of the Gadarenes. It was not the noise of thunder, but the cry of a heart enslaved by dark spiritual forces that had drawn the Lord there. The same Jesus who had silenced the winds was now determined to silence the inner torment of a forgotten man. This detail is precious. Jesus was not heading to a synagogue, nor to a palace. He was going to meet someone considered unclean, someone who dwelt among the tombs, someone nobody wanted nearby. This shows us that there is no distance God is not willing to cross to reach those who seem unreachable. The boat that cut across the waters carried not only 12 men and the Master, it also carried the hope of heaven for a human being who had no hope left anywhere else. How many times have you felt forgotten, as if no one cared? Perhaps people turned their backs. Perhaps friends disappeared. Perhaps family no longer knew what to do. But the story of Jesus' journey to Gadara assures us that you have never been beyond the reach of God, even if all human eyes turn away from you. The divine eyes remain fixed, full of compassion, and when you least expect it. He crosses seas and breaks barriers just to draw near. In that silence, broken only by the movement of the waves. The disciples may not have understood the urgency of Jesus, but all of heaven knew. At stake was the life of a man who, in society's eyes, had no value. What no one could imagine was that this encounter would change not only the story of the possessed man, but also the history of the entire region. The rescue of one despised life would become a testimony powerful enough to reach multitudes, and here lies the hook that keeps us attentive. If Jesus was willing to cross the sea for one man, what would he not do for you? What would come after that journey would reveal the depth of his love and the absolute authority of his word. But even before the encounter took place, it was already clear that the Master had a purpose: to show that even when everything seems lost, there is still hope when God Himself comes to meet us. On the rocky slopes near the city, among caves turned into tombs, lived a man whose story struck horror into everyone who passed that way. His dwelling was not a house, but the graves. His voice was not that of someone conversing with friends, but of a being who screamed day and night, echoing through the hills like an endless lament. Children were warned never to go near those cliffs. Merchants avoided that route. Even the bravest men trembled at the sound of the cries of the possessed. He was the very personification of what evil can do to a life when hope seems extinguished. His appearance spoke for itself. Sunken eyes, inflamed by inner torment, revealed the constant war waged in his mind. His tangled hair, unkempt beard, and skin scarred by open wounds he inflicted upon himself in desperate fits, painted a terrifying picture. His hands bore the scars of chains that had often tried to restrain him, but which were never enough to contain the fury that dominated him. At times, the men of the region joined forces, chaining his wrists and ankles with iron shackles, believing they could control the one who seemed out of his mind. But possessed by a superhuman strength, he would always shatter the fetters and flee, wandering again among the tombs and mountains, always harming himself, always enslaved by something far greater than his own will. Human attempts had failed. Neither physical strength, nor civil authority, nor religious rituals could bring this man real relief. He was considered a hopeless case. Fear had become the natural response of all. It was easier to keep distance than to nurture compassion. Simpler to call him a monster than to see him as a soul in agony. And thus, the enemy of life triumphed, keeping a child of God captive, isolated, and dehumanized. How often does this repeat itself even today? How many live chained by addictions, traumas, or guilt that seem unbreakable? How many hearts scream silently while society looks on with contempt? But what was most frightening was not only his outward condition, but the spiritual reality behind it. When Jesus later asked the name of the spirit tormenting him, the answer was chilling. "My name is Legion, for we are many." Mark 5:2-9. A legion, in the context of the Roman Empire, was a military unit composed of about 6,000 soldiers. Imagine the scene: thousands of demons subjugating a single life, dragging that man into darkness, leaving him no space for rest. That is why he seemed to have lost all identity. He was no longer recognized by who he was, but by the multitude of voices that controlled him. His cries were not only of physical pain, but of a mind torn into thousands of pieces. This revelation is crucial to understand what was at stake. Satan did not want only to torment that man. He wanted to make him a living symbol of defeat, a trophy of humiliation before the universe. Here was someone created to reflect the image of God, reduced to living like a wild animal, driven by forces that pushed him toward self-destruction. Every wound on his body, every shattered chain, every night spent among the tombs was a reminder of the enemy's cruelty. And the silence of men in the face of that scene was proof that no one could free him with their own resources. Yet even in the densest darkness, a spark of humanity remained. The Gospels reveal that when he saw Jesus approaching, the man ran to him. It is true that the demons cried out and resisted, but it was the imprisoned soul that propelled his feet toward the Savior. And this shows us a powerful truth. No matter how enslaved a life may be, deep within there still exists a longing for the Creator. Satan may try to silence it, but he can never completely extinguish the soul's desire to find God. Imagine for a moment the heart of this man. How many times must he have longed to end his own life, believing it would end his pain? How many times must he have remembered when he still lived in society, perhaps with dreams that family, perhaps with dreams that now seemed impossible. Every cry was a plea for help that no one dared answer. But God heard, and heaven moved in his direction. Jesus crossed the sea because that cry did not go unanswered. Here lies a point for us to reflect deeply upon. If a legion of demons could oppress one life so completely, imagine the invisible spiritual battle that also unfolds in our days. Many times we think some cases have no solution, that certain people will never change, that some prisons are permanent. But Jesus' journey to Gadara shows us that there is no chain unbreakable when the Son of God steps in. What is impossible for men is not impossible for God. And perhaps this is the great question echoing from this part of the story. Could anyone free that man from the darkness surrounding him? Was there power enough in the universe to break the invisible shackles that 1,000 demons had placed on his life? Every human resource had been tried and failed. Everyone had already given up on him. But the story was not over. What would happen when the possessed man came face to face with the Lord of Life? What no one could imagine was about to unfold. The boat finally touched the rocky shore of the land of the Gadarenes. The heavy silence of the place contrasted with the bird song that drifted from the other side of the lake. The disciples, still unsettled after the stormy crossing, cautiously observed that strange territory marked by caves and tombs. Little did they know they were about to witness one of the most intense encounters in the ministry of Jesus. He stepped out of the boat with steady steps, as if he already knew the path and the purpose of his arrival. There was no hesitation on his face. There was mission. And it was in this dark setting that the unexpected began to unfold. The scene played out as a contrast impossible to ignore. On one side, a man completely dominated, running among the tombs, screaming with wild eyes and a body scarred by pain. On the other, Jesus calm, steady, walking without hurry, as one who knows exactly who he is and why he came. There was no fear in his expression, no agitation in his gestures. He was not intimidated by the malignant power manifesting itself. On the contrary, his presence radiated a silent, irresistible authority that even caused the disciples to step back with a mix of awe and reverence. Suddenly, the possessed man closed the distance. The sound of his steps echoed on the stones, his broken chains clinking with every movement. The disciples, terrified, likely thought of defending themselves, of fleeing, or of shielding the Master. But Jesus stood immovable, simply waiting. And then the unexpected happened. Instead of attacking, the one who came with such force fell at the feet of Christ. The strength that had terrorized the entire town now bowed before the Son of God. The possessed body collapsed to the ground, and the voice that came out of his mouth was no longer his own, but that of the multitude of spirits that controlled him. "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" The legion knelt, acknowledging the supreme authority before which they could not resist. It was a spine-tingling moment. An entire army of demons, which had reduced a man to live as if dead among the tombs, now bowed before one, not before soldiers, not before chains, but before the mere presence of Jesus. The contrast was absolute. The legion was numerous, but Jesus is infinite. They had strength, but he held power. They came to dominate, but ended up confessing the sovereignty of the Lord of the universe. And this leads us to reflect, if even the demons recognize who Jesus is, are we also willing to surrender to him? The air felt heavy at that moment. The disciples watched, bewildered, trying to understand how someone so tormented could, at the same time, show submission. It was as if an invisible battle was being fought before their eyes. The voice that resounded was deep, desperate, filled with hatred and fear. "Do not torment me," they cried, begging Jesus not to send them away. It was not the man who spoke, but the legion pleading. And here, a breathtaking scene is revealed. Evil, accustomed to defying men, now begs for mercy before the Creator. It was then that Jesus asked, "What is your name?" The answer was direct and disturbing. "My name is Legion, for we are many, a spiritual multitude imprisoning a single life." What a scene! One man becoming the battlefield of thousands of enemies. But the mere fact that Jesus engaged them in dialogue revealed something profound. He was not intimidated, not terrified, not insecure. He knew exactly what was happening and showed that his power did not depend on the number of adversaries. 1 against 6,000 was not disadvantage, was guaranteed victory. And if we pause for a moment to reflect, how many times do we also feel surrounded by invisible legions? Not visible demons like in that scene, but problems, anxieties, debts, illnesses, guilt, and fears piling up like an army against our peace. Sometimes it seems there is no way out, that we are too small before the weight of what oppresses us. But the scene in Gadara reminds us that it does not matter how many stand against you. If Jesus is by your side, they will all have to bow before him. The legion may be numerous, but the power of Christ is absolute. The man, prostrate on the ground, trembled. Perhaps somewhere deep in his consciousness there was a spark of hope. Was he standing before the chance to be free? Or would this be just another episode of humiliation and pain? And we, as we picture this scene, are invited to ask ourselves the same question. When the forces of darkness seem to crush us, Do we believe there is a power able to raise us up? Do we trust that Jesus is greater than everything that imprisons us? If even an entire legion could not resist the gaze and the voice of the Master, what would happen in the next instant? What decision would Jesus make in response to the desperate plea? The silence after the cry of the legion felt suffocating. The possessed man remained prostrate before Jesus, his body writhing in spasms, but his gaze fixed on the Master. The multitude of spirits that dominated him begged desperately, "Do not send us out of this region. Let us go into those pigs." Their plea sounded like a distorted chorus, a mixture of arrogance and fear, like defeated soldiers still trying to negotiate their surrender. They knew they could not resist the authority of Christ. All that remained was to beg for a less terrible fate. Around them, a herd of pigs grazed peacefully on the hillside. The contrast was striking. On one side, the calm of the animals, unaware of the spiritual scene. On the other, the invisible turbulence of thousands of demons about to be expelled. The legion's request revealed their true nature. They did not seek redemption, only another body to inhabit, another way to spread destruction. Jesus listened in silence, and even that silence was loaded with power. There was no hurry in his decision. With a single word, he could have cast them into the eternal abyss. Yet he chose to turn that moment into an unforgettable lesson for all who witnessed it. Then, with the same authority with which he had calmed the storm on the sea, Jesus pronounced his command. It was not a long speech, nor an elaborate ritual, just a few words, and at the sound of his voice, the legion was torn out of that man. What iron chains could not achieve, what human hands could not accomplish, a single order from the Son of God brought to pass. The battle ended in an instant where once there had been screams. Now there was only the labored breathing of someone beginning to be free. But the scene did not end there. The evil spirits, upon leaving the man, rushed into the pigs. Suddenly, the tranquility of the herd gave way to terrified frenzy. The animals bolted in panic, stampeding down the steep slope until they violently plunged into the sea. The noise was deafening. Squeals, rocks tumbling, water churning, and then the silence of death. The sight was shocking. More than 2,000 pigs vanished beneath the deep waters, leaving the landscape marked by chaos. It was as if the universe had paused to bear witness. The demons, who thought themselves invincible, were forced to reveal their true essence, agents of destruction. Everything they touch, they destroy. Everything they dominate, they ruin. By entering the pigs, they showed the world what they had secretly been doing in a man's life all along, always driving him toward death. The herdsmen who had been tending the pigs fled in panic to the city, carrying with them the report of what had happened. It was impossible to hide it. The echoes of screams, the sound of the pigs, and the transformation on the face of the delivered man would soon spread throughout the whole region. What had once been just a story of fear among the tombs would now become a living testimony of Jesus' power, and in that moment, amid the remnants of the chaos, a scene of profound beauty began to unfold. The man who had once writhed on the ground was now sitting, calm, at peace. His eyes, once filled with hatred and torment, now shone with gratitude. His hands, once used to harm himself, rested quietly. His body, once an instrument of despair, was now a temple of God's presence. What a powerful transformation! An entire life redefined in a single encounter. But here arises a question we cannot ignore. How would the town react? Would they have the courage to recognize that a miracle had taken place? Or would they be more concerned about the pigs lost than about the man restored? How often do we also place our interests above transformed lives? How often do we prefer the security of our possessions rather than face the power that radically changes people? What no one could deny was what had happened before their eyes. Jesus had confronted a legion of demons and triumphed with absolute authority. He had proven that no prison is too strong to withstand his power. And the man who had once been feared would from that day on become living proof that God seeks even the most forgotten to rescue them from death. The climax of that scene was only the beginning of something greater. The delivered man would not only receive a new life, but also a mission. And it is precisely this turning point that prepares us for the next chapter. For the question that echoes after this deliverance is, what does someone do after having their life completely transformed? The sun had already risen higher on the horizon, casting light over the hills of the Gadarenes. The scene now unfolding was completely different from what the disciples had witnessed upon arrival. The man who once ran among the tombs, screaming like a wild beast, was now sitting at the feet of Jesus. His eyes no longer reflected torment, but serenity. His face, once marked by despair, now radiated peace. His hands, once scarred by shattered chains, rested firmly, like those of someone who had finally found rest. He was clothed in his right mind before the Master who had forever changed his story. Soon, the townspeople arrived, led by the terrified reports of the swineherds. As they approached, they expected to find chaos. But what they saw left them speechless. The man who for years had embodied fear, shame, and scandal was transformed. No screams, no attacks, no threatening glare. Only calm, only restored life. It was impossible to deny. A miracle had happened before their eyes. Yet, instead of rejoicing, many were filled with fear. It was not reverence, but unease. The loss of the pigs weighed heavier on their hearts than the recovery of a life. To them, financial loss was more real than spiritual deliverance. How often does this repeat itself even today? How often do we value what we lost more than what God is showing us is eternal? It is possible that we have living testimonies of Christ's power right before us. Yet we prefer to look toward the restless waters where our pigs drowned, frightened. The people begged Jesus to leave their region. They did not want his presence anymore. They wanted no more miracles that would disrupt their interests. The Master, respecting their freedom, prepared to return to the boat. But before he departed, something extraordinary happened. The man who had been delivered came near, tears in his eyes and supplication in his voice. "Lord, let me go with you." It was the cry of someone who did not want to be separated from the one who had restored his life. He knew his only safety was to remain close to Jesus. But surprisingly, the answer was not the yes he might have expected. Jesus looked at him with tenderness and said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." Mark 5:19. In other words, your mission is not only to follow me closely, but to be my living witness where no one else would dare to go. The man set free had received not only a new life, but also a calling. He would become the unlikely preacher, the unlikely missionary, the sign that God can transform any story. And so he did. He returned to his land and began to proclaim in the Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him. The people who once saw him as a monster now listened to him as a witness. The same lips that had screamed in pain now spoke of hope. The same hands that had once harmed themselves now blessed others. His life became a living sermon, impossible to ignore. And here lies a powerful truth. No one can argue against a transformed life. Arguments may be refuted, but the visible change in someone who has experienced Christ's power speaks for itself. Imagine for a moment the impact this must have had. Where once echoed the nightly cries of torment, now rang the announcement of deliverance. Where once there was fear, now there was hope. Where once all saw defeat, now all could see victory. That man did not need grand speeches to convince anyone. His very existence was proof that Jesus is stronger than any legion. And here rises a question that also reaches us. What do we do with the deliverance we have received? Do we keep it only for ourselves, or do we turn it into testimony? How many around us still live in chains, waiting to hear there is a way out? How many believe they are beyond hope, when in truth, God has already moved toward them? The man freed in Gadara teaches us that no one is restored only for themselves. We are restored to become instruments of restoration. The disciples, too, would never forget that scene. They learn that Jesus cared not only for crowds, but for individuals. That no journey was too long when the destination was a single, desperate heart. That no legion was too great to resist the power of their master. And that the kingdom of God, the story of the demon-possessed man of Gadara, is not just an account of something that happened 2,000 years ago. It is a mirror of what God continues to do even today. That man seemed beyond recovery. He was alone, forgotten, a prisoner of forces no one could see, but everyone feared. Society had given up on him. His family may no longer have believed in his return, and he himself had no strength left to hope. But Jesus crossed the sea for the sole purpose of finding him and setting him free. This means there is no distance the divine love is not willing to cross to save you. How many times do we also feel like him, chained by thoughts, habits, or guilt that seem impossible to break? How many times do we believe no one cares, that we've been left aside, that our story has no solution anymore? But Jesus' journey to Gadara reminds us of an eternal truth. You are never forgotten. All of heaven can move for your sake alone. And what you cannot overcome on your own, Christ has already overcome for you. The delivered man not only regained his sanity, his family, and his dignity. He received a mission. He was sent to bear witness of what had happened, and his transformed life became living proof of God's power. That is also our mission. When we experience deliverance in Christ, we are not called to hide it, but to live in such a way that all can see. A changed life speaks louder than 1,000 words. And perhaps today is the moment for you to also surrender your chains, your pain, and your fears into the hands of Jesus. He can transform your story into a testimony. And I ask you, what is your legion? What is stealing your peace, your sleep, your hope? If even the demons had to kneel before Christ, then there's nothing in your life that he cannot conquer. All it takes is for you to allow him to be Lord in every area of your life.